And I'm happy to say that we have a very interesting conversation coming up with two friends of mine, one of them I've known a little while, and the other is a brand new friend. Paul Mallet is a retired colonel from the Canadian Forces who has been, since his retirement several years ago, has gone into civilian peacekeeping activities and has been very active in a number of peacemaking and peace building activities in other countries. And so he has a wealth of experience in terms of looking at the ethics of a number of various kinds of operations. And he has introduced me to someone I had not met before, Dr. Qais Ghanem, who is a retired physician in neurology, a professor at, I've forgotten which university you said you...
Ottawa,
the University of Ottawa, who has been retired for several years. He is from Yemen. So these two fellows have been giving talks together and have known each other a while, but a few weeks ago, they gave a talk to the Group of 78, a very commendable organization to which I belong in Ottawa. And so I thought I'd like to follow up with a continuation of that. And of course, as we all know, there is a war going on in Yemen, and it's a baffling war. It's very hard to understand any war, but at any rate, this one has certainly been in the headlines a lot lately as we're anticipating the increase in hunger. That famine has been there already, and disease goes with famine. So the people in Yemen, especially in North Yemen, I believe, are suffering greatly. And there is now, at last, an effort to try to get some of the other countries to press the Saudi Arabian government to stop pursuing this war, because it seems to be the Saudis who are doing it. So, gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. Nice to see you, Paul. And I'm going to ask Dr. Ghanem, if you will give us a little background to this situation and tell us how Yemen came into this terrible predicament.
Well, I come from South Yemen, and the main city that most people would recognize is the city of Aden. It was a British colony for the longest time, for more than 100 years, since 1839, until independence, which was around 1967. And then that part of Yemen became the South Yemen, the Republic of South Yemen. It was actually went through phases when it was socialist and run by kind of people who were communists, and they fought amongst themselves and so on. Now, just to get back to the division, North Yemen, on the other hand, was a much bigger part of Yemen, and it was an autocratic religious monarchy run by Imam Yahya at that time. And he then was kind of succeeded by his son, and there were all sorts of fights over the throne. But it was a very, very backward part of what is now called Yemen. And this was just called Yemen, whereas our area was called the Republic of South Yemen. Mm-hmm. So at one point, they decided to merge together into one country.
When would that have been? About?
That would have been in 60. Let's see, in the 78, something like that. No, earlier than that, around 70. Yeah.
Okay.
And as a result of that, because North Yemen is the bigger chunk of Yemen, I guess it was overpowering, and it was mostly the population was much higher. And in any case, South Yemen joined after there was civil war in South Yemen. So the different factions kind of killed each other off or destroyed each other off. So by the time South Yemen joined North Yemen, the infrastructure and the political structure was decimated. And
from a war or just downhill development?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
There had been an actual war in South Yemen before they joined North Yemen.
Yes, amongst the different factions, political factions. Yes, with assassinations.
They've been fighting a long time.
Yes, within South Yemen. Yes, okay. And so it was convenient and easier for North Yemen to take over South Yemen, and it became one country. And many of the leaders from South Yemen escaped to North Yemen and found some kind of positions within the government of North Yemen later on, including the current president.
The current president. Who is the current president? Is this a North Yemen presidency, or is it meant to be? Do they pretend to be or claim to be the government for the whole country?
No, they're the government for the whole country. Yeah.
Yeah. President Hadi.
They're North Yemeni, right?
No, the government of North Yemen became the dominant government. It was at that time run by somebody called Saleh. And Saleh has been assassinated recently. Okay. So the whole of Yemen, because South Yemen disintegrated, became under the same guy, Saleh. Right? So then it became Yemen without South and North. It was just the Republic of Yemen under President Saleh, who was later assassinated. And the fighting has been going on now amongst groups who are vying for power, as simple as that.
Okay, now the fight then within Yemen was already going on. The war was going on before the Saudis joined in. Is that right? The Saudis intervened in what was already an ongoing war.
Correct.
That's correct. Okay. And is it true, Qais, that the current president Hadi is resident in Saudi Arabia? I understand he's relatively unpopular and poor health, and even almost under house arrest.
Hadi was the president of South Yemen at one point, and then later on he teamed up with Saleh and became his vice president, and he kind of handed South Yemen to Saleh. And now, with all this fighting taking place, he has escaped to either Jeddah or Riyadh. I don't remember, but somewhere in Saudi Arabia, living quite happily there, away from all trouble.
Now, as I understand it, the Saudis say they want him to go back and become the ruler of the whole country. Is that their goal?
Yes, I think so. They would like that, yes.
Well, is he willing to? If the situation made it possible, would he go back, or would he say he's having a nice time, thank you very much, but leave me alone?
No, he would be delighted as long as they get rid of the Houthis for him. Yes.
All right. Okay. Okay, well, that's a beginning. I'm beginning to get some glimpse of it. I guess what I'm wondering first, though, is when you look at the differences between the people of the North and the South, are there already ethnic cleavages between them? Is it there are certain populations of certain ethnic communities live in the North, or one single ethnic community in the North and a different one in the South? Or would they say, well, we're all the same, we're all Yemeni, and and we're not that different. They all speak the same language? Well, everybody, I guess, speaks Arabic, right?
Yes. Well, to answer your question is, no, they are ethnically the same people. But of course, Yemen is a tribal country, just like Scotland was tribal at one time. And so you have the McTavish and the McDonalds and so on. And the language, of course, varies a little bit, just like it varies between North and South United States. You know, the different accents and so on. However, other than that, they are the same people. Like I mentioned, my own great-grandfather comes from a small town in North Yemen called Turba. And he decided to move to Aden, and then after 3 generations, I came along. Yeah.
Okay, but now you did mention, now we've got these people, the Houthi, and I'd like to get clear about who they are. They presumably are Shia Muslim, is that right?
Yes,
and,
they're a small group.
So they're a small group.
They're a relatively small group population-wise. You know, the population of Yemen is approximately 28 million. That's the latest figure I heard, although it wouldn't surprise me if it has dropped because of all the murders that are taking place as a result of the aerial war against Yemen. And there are one sect of the Shia group of people in the Islamic world. And one of the main countries where there are lots of Shias are, of course, is Iran. And the differences are really, to my mind, so trivial. It all depends on who should have followed Prophet Muhammad to the throne of the Islamic Empire. It is that ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now, but there was already a fight before the Saudis jumped into the fight. There was already something going on. Now, was this started by the Houthis, or how did that? Who brought that into an open warfare?
That's a very good. Yeah, that's a very good question and very relevant. Like I mentioned, Saleh was a brutal and selfish dictator who kind of ruled Yemen from 1978 until his assassination until 2012. So for 34 years, he was the ruler. He was actually a mere sergeant in the Yemeni army, no more than that. But he managed to assassinate his superiors and he established himself as president. The Houthis are a significant number of people in the north, and they are Shiites. So what? Let them be Shiites. If they want to be Shiites or Catholics, so that's their business. But they want a share of power, like anybody else. Mm-hmm. Like the Quebecers want a share of power in Canada. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that did not sit well with Saleh, and so they got accused of being fomented by the Iranians and all that stuff. And I personally, from the comfort of my seat here in Canada, would say that that's not true, in my opinion. But of course, this is what's happening. People always get accused of things. I'm not a Shiite at all. I have nothing to do with them, or I don't even believe in religion. So they want a share of power, just like everybody else.
Okay. I was talking about 2 months ago, we had a talk show with a young woman from Jordan who's living in Yellowknife and a young man who was in Sana'a, Yemen. So we had a Zoom conference call like this one between people from very great distances. And he said that this fellow said that he didn't see any influence of Iran either. And he was living in Sana'a. I guess he was close. He was certainly surrounded, I suppose, with Houthis. But he described them much more as a militant organization rather than as a sect or a pre-existing social group. I got the impression from him that they were, that's all they had in common, was that they were opposed to the government and were a fighting organization. But your description makes them sound as if they're a little bit more permanent, that they had an identity all along as Houthis. Is that right?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying is that is not different from the Catholics in Ireland or the Protestants in Ireland. They want a share of power. If they had a proportional share of power, I think all this war would not have happened. But the problem is that if the whole political system is a total dictatorship run by one man for 34 years, like I said, like Saleh, what do you expect?
So their claim was a reasonable claim. They wanted
Absolutely.
some sort of political representation. Yeah.
Yes, to me, it was. But you won't find all that many people who agree with me because they don't look
certainly,
at it.
It's now caught up in this part of the world with the whole question of which side are you on, Saudi Arabia or Iran? And the Yemen question seems to have been subordinated to that kind of discussion about which side you're on, as if that's all it amounted to. But I get from you that it was already a conflict, and before Iran or certainly Saudi Arabia got involved, right?
Well, what I would say to that is I don't want to be with Saudi Arabia at all. I also don't want to be with Iran at all. What these groups should do is feel and act as Yemenis. And if there are slight differences in their religions and how they pray or how they hold their hands or arms when they are, doing their prayers in the mosque, these trivialities should not cause a war.
Sure. I think we'll all agree that. Let's stipulate that from the outset, that we agree that that's nonsense. And yet, of course, people lose their lives over such nonsense. Paula, let's shift over to you because you and Qais seem to have a meeting of minds about this issue. And I'm not sure how you got into thinking about it or working on it. What is your take on this situation? And do you agree with everything that Dr. Ghanem has said?
Well, I certainly do. I think Qais has got a real handle on it. I would just offer a larger perspective. Certainly, the issue of power and the civil war that's going on in Yemen is a core to this, and it's one of the things that has to be solved. However, one of the things that's enabling all of this, of course, and there are overlays of power that are happening here. There certainly is the Saudi and the Iranian engagement in this. Unfortunately, what the Saudi and the Iranian engagement does is it enables a lot of the killing. So these tens of thousands of people that have been killed here have really been enabled in that particular sense. And then the wider community outside of Saudi Arabia and Iran, who is enabling the Saudi Arabians. The issue of arms sales that goes on from the United States to Saudi Arabia, the arms sales that go on from the United Kingdom, and even from Canada. So we're all complicit in soaking the Middle East with more and more weapons, and we're now faced with a situation of an insurgency, which really, from the perspective of all the actors in this region, is not winnable from a military perspective. There are ways that you can easily shut that down. So I think what has to happen is that certainly some transactional things have to happen in order to reduce the killing, the famine, the health issues, and these are the more the transactional things. the problems that's going to remain are going to be the relational problems between the Houthis and the rest of Yemen and the various factions that are there, and those have to be worked out from a relational perspective. It's certainly, to me, the way this war is going to end in some way, it's going to have to face some sort of truth regarding just sheer exhaustion, just the amount of blood and treasure that the Saudis are spending, and the Americans and the Iranians are enabling all of this, is going to come to some point that's going to stop the violence. And then
can I interrupt you? You said the Iranians are enabling this. I guess my question is, how much are the Iranians involved? And I mean, does anybody really know? And what is their commitment? What are they doing? And if they stopped, would it? You say they're enabling it. Well, could they disenable it?
Oh, absolutely. You could stop those airstrikes in 2 weeks. In my military career, for example, what the Iranians are doing are feeding things like missiles and rockets, which are being fired into Saudi Arabia. And on the other side of the coin, the Saudi Arabians are using very, very complicated and sophisticated fighter jets from the United States. And these things are incredibly parts and maintenance intensive, and weapons are very, very expensive. If you shut off the supply line, there's a saying in the military, you know, amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics. If you cut the logistics to those aircraft, the same thing would happen as happened after the fall of the Shah in Iran. After the fall of the Shah, the F-14 Tomcats were useless within a month, you know, as an air force to the new regime. So you could certainly stop one of the large causes of death and destruction in Yemen by cutting out the airstrikes. You know, precision-guided munitions, I assure you, are not that.
Okay, now we have both sides firing at each other.
That's correct, and being enabled.
And the Houthis are equipped entirely by Iran.
Well, not entirely, but they are receiving the bulk of their armaments, rockets, and missiles, and things like this that enable them to continue this fight from somebody. And the conventional wisdom is that is coming from Iran. And on the other side of the coin, it's very, very clear, and nobody attempts to hide it in any fashion, that those weapons are coming from the United States, the UK, and even Canada with regards to the LAVs and some of the weapons that we're selling Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Big advantage that we have now with the Khashoggi murder that happened is that the light is now being shone on the Saudi sort of engagement, or what they are actually doing in Yemen. And this is causing some serious political backlash in Western countries.
Yes, although I must say that 90% of the publicity given to the issue is focused on the murder of this journalist, Khashoggi, but not on the nature of the famine that is being promoted. I don't know. I mean, it seems certainly the Saudis are blocking this port of Hodeidah. Yeah. And that, I guess, is the cause of the famine, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, that's one of the causes that are going to happen.
Well, there doesn't seem to be any outcry against selling the weapons to the Saudis. At least in the U.S., you and I have belonged to groups here in Canada that have been protesting against the fact that Canada has been selling, I guess, armored personnel carriers to Saudi Arabia, which presumably are supporting the war. But the press in the U.S. is very upset about the killing of that one man, but but they seem to accept as reasonable the explanation that Trump gives about, well, we make a lot of money from selling these weapons, and we don't want to cut off this money, you know, and therefore it's okay that and I guess also that the weapons are being used against people who are supported by Iran, and Iran is our enemy. Therefore, there are two good reasons why we don't mind helping the Saudis.
Well, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. There really has been a growing statements among members of Congress that this has got to stop. Enough is enough. Germany has started to speak up, and I think even though the murder of Khashoggi got a lot of attention, I think what it has really done is now put the spotlight on Saudi, Saudi behaviors in the Middle East, and it is not going to be a very favorable spotlight, and it's going to stop. I think the pressure against President Trump is growing daily in this particular issue.
And it's about time too.
You bet.
Absolutely.
And I think every one of us here, and I don't know, in Canada, I have not yet met a single person who's in favor of Trump or his point of view. Although I have to say that the logic behind the Canadian government's continued provision of armored personnel carriers to Saudi Arabia is completely consistent with the argument that Trump puts forward about why it's okay for them to go ahead and sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. That is, it's murder is okay as long as you buy your weapons from us because we need the money. No, I guess we don't really need the money. We like the money. So that's all we have to worry about is not the ethics of what we're doing, but the fact that, we're in business. Excuse my cynical and sardonic attitude about this, but I don't find it morally very uplifting to hear the rationale that our government puts forward. Our government being, of course, in this case, the Canadian government. So,
the sad thing, Metta, sorry. The sad thing is that both Saudi Arabia, if it is actually supplying all this armaments to one side, and Iran, if we assume that it is supplying armaments, none of them have casualties of their own. They are actually fighting from the air or just simply selling or donating armaments. And the ones who die are the Yemenis. And the Yemenis are dying like flies. We have numbers like there are about 8 million children in Yemen out of a population of about 28 million who are at risk of death from famine. I mean, these are horrendous numbers. These are astronomical numbers, staggering. Why? Because, and here they are, these people from the comfort of their offices are selling or donating armaments and in a proxy war, as they call it. What's that got to do with the poor Yemenis who are suffering that much? So this is a really crime against humanity.
It is, and it's justified by it creates jobs. We don't want to lose all those jobs. Sorry, I shouldn't intervene, Paul.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and I believe the pressure is building against the current Liberal government. But I think the question is we got to help them with alternatives. I mean, what can Canada actually do in this sense? What can the global community do? But we ask ourselves as Canadians, that we shouldn't refuse to do what we can do. And if you're interested in a perspective of a peace practitioner or a peace professional in this case, there's really 4 pillars that need to be done. We have to be present in the crisis in some way. Whether we're going to give aid or something like this, we have to be impartial so we can talk to all sides, the Saudis and the Iranians and the Americans and the Houthis. We've got to bring certain values of nonviolence and stop the violence sort of thing to the table, human rights. And we've got to have these necessary communications and relentless diplomacy things. We in Canada cannot get in there from a power point of view and stop the war, but there are things that we can do that we shouldn't refuse. And to get at that, the very principles of bringing light to the truth of what's going on, a lot of what Qais has just said in the last 20 minutes. If we can be some participant in the truth, you know, bring some language to it, nonviolent communication, bring humanitarian aid, you know, and absolutely relentless diplomacy to try and stop the violence. This is something we can do, but we are singularly absent from this conflict from a political point of view. It is now emerging that the tiff we're having with Saudi Arabia is now becoming bigger than the bread box. And a lot of other countries are now looking on Saudi Arabia as a very unfavorable light. And maybe that is going to pressure Trump through Congress to do something about this. Because as I said, you could stop the bulk of the killing in 2 weeks just by cutting the logistics supply lines of weapons. A no-fly zone, no weapons transfer zone, and be serious about it. That's the things you can do.
Yeah. I very much like what you said, Paul. This is absolutely, you've summarized it very well. I think, you know, people sometimes listen to a peace kind of promoting person like you, and they say, oh, this is all, you know, nonsense. It doesn't work that way. But I think the Yemenis, both in the north and the south, and the Houthis and everybody have had enough. And I'm sure the time is very ripe for that kind of approach, the one that you mentioned, not a struggle that is kind of aided and abetted by Trump and the United States. We want a country that has the respect of the world, such as the Canadian government, if they are listening to this interview, to actually take the initiative. They don't need anybody else to be there. If they can convince the two parties to meet in Sweden, as I understand is happening next week, and actually supervise the whole thing, take this as their project for 2019, you know, as a kind of peace project. It doesn't really matter what the United States and Iran want to do.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think we need something even bigger. I mean, as you march through the last couple of decades and even maybe 50 years, the revolution in military affairs happens almost, well, is in an exponential. You go from nuclear weapons to drones to artificial intelligence to all of these sorts of things happen, and we spend trillions every year soaking this planet with weapons. And we really do need to have a revolution in peace affairs. We need to do something that is going to take the laws of armed conflict, which just has people sit back and be complacent about it and give them something to do. One of the things about the laws of military intervention, it must be an absolute last resort, Otherwise, it becomes in the domain of crimes against humanity. But the problem is that if it's the only resort you have, we wind up defaulting to it all the time. Yeah. So we need a very, very robust codified body of international peace operations that are going to be absolutely and strictly required by nations as a precursor to even thinking about military intervention. And this is very, very simply done in codification. I mean, the laws of armed conflict say you start with a just cause, so that's the killing starts right away, and it rattles its way down to the very bottom of, you know, use of weapons, those sorts of things, proportionality. At the very bottom, it says, try to avoid collateral damage killing civilians. Well, if you had peace operations that simply flip this on its head, literally what you're going to start is stop the violence, care for the victims, negotiations, whatever. And then all the way at the bottom, you can get to the justice and reconciliation part and sort out, you know, the differences that cause this conflict. Really? And I think with some sort of revolution from a global perspective in this sort of way, it will go a long way to trickling its way down to various conflicts and should mitigate some of them.
Yeah,
and every life.
Let's also even think and now about the how to quickly put an end to the famine and to, I don't know, there was cholera. I'm not sure it's still going on. But
yes, it is.
It is. it's continuing, because it seems to me, even if you did what you said, Paul, shut off the flow of ammunition or whatever, and wait for it to dry up. In the meantime, there are going to be a lot of people dead. I think what we ought to organize is some sort of airlift of food supplies and drop in to every place where you know that there is famine going on, either by plane or if you have drones that can go in there, but immediately within the next 2 or 3 days, start sending food supplies in. And then there probably are also technologies for that we could send in material on how to treat people who have cholera, how to diagnose a case of cholera and what you do for it. And here are your syringes, and here's how to inject the medication, and so on, so that people, without actually being able to send physicians into the field, could actually begin to get a control over the disease that goes with this, even as we're doing the thing that Paul has suggested, which is shut off the war.
But a big airlift would be, extremely dangerous, and these planes would probably, are at big risk of being shot down. I mean, the easier solution is for the Americans and the Iranians to say enough, or just the Americans to say to the Saudis, that's it, enough. Open the ports, and you wouldn't need an airlift. You'd start bringing the boats in there. The UN would start shipping in supplies. I think that probably within 24 hours, things could be moving in that direction. But
well, I'm glad you said that.
Look at that core cause, and he's sitting in the White House right now. He can solve.
I really. Sorry, I wanted to say just that what Paul said is exactly the right thing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we already have a port, which is a big port, the main port of Yemen, and through which all the food supplies and medication and all that stuff used to come. So why is the Saudi government or MBS or whoever is doing this putting an embargo on that port? This is the cause. This is the reason. As far as the medication is concerned, and I happen to be, qualified in tropical medicine. Cholera, you cannot treat cholera if you don't have a clean water supply. It's not a question of injecting into people's arms kind of the cholera vaccine. What you want is to have clean water. How can you have clean water if there are bombs landing on the city of Sana'a and Hodeidah and Qais and all the time? Every person who is killed, there are 10 people injured. This is the usual ratio of war, which our colonel here knows all about. So, it is so obvious what should happen. You should allow imports to come to Hodeidah as they used to do. Stop all this bombing from up the sky by the Saudis, and everything will fall into place.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to disagree with that. Paul?
Yeah, let them fight with sticks and swords, and you'll have less collateral damage.
Mm-hmm. Now, would that end the fight that had already been going on within Yemen? You say that there was a war before the Saudis and the Iranians got involved. What would it take to end that particular conflict? And you say what are they fighting about? They're clearly not fighting about the prophet's nephew or who inherited the leadership of Islam. What are they fighting about? And you said that the Houthis simply want to have more power in the government. And is that the nature of the thing, that there would have to be some sort of a new constitution that would give some political clout to the Houthis, or what?
Yeah, well, if you're asking me, then I think it's as simple as what happened in Ireland. You know, the Catholics and Protestants were fighting for decades. Eventually, they decided that they will share the pie. And that's exactly what happened after many, many, many assassinations and a lot of death. And so if you can convince the two groups that, look, the people in the north, the Houthis, have to be part of, have a share in running the government. The people in the Taiz area in the south should also have the same. And those who are in the east, you know, in whatever, Beida and that part of Yemen should also be represented. Everybody will be quite happy with that. Nobody wants to continue this war because I suspect from the number of casualties that nearly every family in Yemen has lost or either somebody killed or has one or more people wounded. And definitely there are so many of them living in Djibouti, you know, just escaped because they have to somehow escape death, or Somalia, or in Egypt. And some of them try to come to Canada to escape this fighting. They would be absolutely delighted to stop. But what prevents all this is the politicians. The politicians, it is in their interest to continue this fight because it's a matter of, for them, power and sorry.
Yeah, no, Qais, you're absolutely right. In the dynamic of peace operations, you're going to get some exhaustion from the military war, and you're going to make a transition from the military aspect of this conflict to a political aspect. But the political aspect is going to require some sort of bloodless revolution. It's going to need a new constitution, a whole new construct. And then the third leg of this triangle is going to be the relational one. You're going to have a population that is being incredibly traumatized. And this is going to be an issue of generations. You know, just look at the residential schools or the war in Sri Lanka and things like this, and the way that this bleeds into the generations. So you've really got three legs to this that you have to look at. But I'm sure it's very, very unfortunate, but from a military perspective, a lot of wars don't end with military victory on one side. They end with exhaustion. They've just had it in some sort of uneasy ceasefire, and some sort of transactional political solution is kind of imposed. But underneath, the differences still simmer. The intertribal rivalries and the religious rivalries and the trauma and all these things are bubbling. So you've got to be very, very careful to, in parallel, looking at the transactional solutions, which are political, and to look at the relational ones at the same time in the same parallel track.
Yes, but the main aspect
to go together.
The main aspect of that solution, as you mentioned, is sharing the wealth, sharing the power. If people knew that they had a say in what's happening, or they have a piece of the pie, I think everybody will eventually say, look, we've had enough. We have children who are growing up. A lot of them are traumatized. A lot of them have lost their arms and legs and eyes and hearing and so on. And we have to somehow come to an accommodation and some form.
Yeah. You've got to look at, traditional closure models where eventually you're going to get to the point of this reconciliation where the truth is told, is accepted by everybody, including offenders, and some restitution is made, and then some ability of everyone to get on with their lives, including the offenders, have to be able to get along with their lives and establish some sort of societal construct that deals with harmony and moving forward. This is incredibly difficult, and we know even from Canada how difficult that is. But we've got to start down that path. That's the path we have to go down. The path of continuing war doesn't get you there. It doesn't get you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. One hurdle in this solution, as mentioned, is that we have to remember that Yemen exists in an area of dictatorships. There is no democracy in the whole of that area. That's so right. It's difficult to put pressure on governments in the different countries surrounding Yemen, especially in Saudi Arabia, because there's no democracy. It's just a one-man show. And much lesser extent applies maybe to Iran as well. But definitely in all, I can speak about the Arab countries, there is no democracy.
Yeah. If you have an Arab Spring, like Egypt, for example, you know, the youth had the revolution, but when the revolution was over, they lost at the ballot box. You know, they weren't able to make the transition from being an activist or a revolutionary to a politician. It's very easy to destroy societies. It's a lot more difficult to find solutions to all the complicated problems that are there. Okay. And you really have to, I mean, Yemen was, in my perspective, was an incredibly educated society. I mean, it produced a lot of very, very highly educated people in comparison to Saudi Arabia anyway. Mm-hmm. And there's a basis there to begin with.
You know, what you're saying, you know, has two prongs to it. You know, on the one hand, Paul, what you're saying is that it would be really easy to put an end to this war. Just shut off the
military part of the war.
The military part of it.
Relational part, big problem.
And then you're saying, but the rest, then you get into this big problem of how to get to from there with a bunch of people who are exhausted and who don't have the technological, or rather the political background to know how to create a democratic government, even if they were healthy and well. So it seems to me that really we ought to have an institutional support system like the United Nations or through the United Nations that would be ready to come in at the end of hostilities and say, here, let us help you set up a system that we think will at least get you going in the right direction. Is there ever any kind of effort to take the phase immediately after the end of a war and bring it through this long period of trauma as people try to live through what they've been suffering, and build the new institutions that they need?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in peacekeeping issues, you have pre-conflict, during conflict, and post-conflict range of activities that goes on. You know, one is in the preventative piece, the other was peacemaking, and then at the end is peacekeeping and peace building. And for sure, you know, issues like Cyprus, where we've separated belligerent parties there, the Turks and the Greeks, for what, 30, 40 years. I mean, all of these constructs can be developed, and the UN has the capacity to do that.
But that's a poor example, because it seems to me the fact that in Cyprus you still don't have an integrated society or a unified government means that it hasn't succeeded, and that we need some better effort that might work.
But the question is, the political solution, what has succeeded is there's no longer killing. You know,
well, you
have stopped the violence, and people have to take responsibility for themselves to develop the political solution. I mean, how many generations in Cyprus is it going to take, you know, before that's sorted out? And does it have to be sorted out in the domains of Greece and Turkey as opposed to the Cypriots? And how long is it going to take the Houthis and the rest of Yemen to get together? You have a huge emotional trauma that sort of has to burn a little bit. That has to be mitigated before you're no longer talking from an emotional perspective, and you're now looking at some sort of rational way of caring for your grandchildren.
But can you give me a better example than Cyprus of a place where the post-conflict peace building effort has succeeded, that they have gone back to a successful integrated society?
Well, during my military career, we did 50, 60 peacekeeping missions. I mean, there were missions all the way from after the Israeli war, for example, issues of Bosnia, issues in Kosovo, many smaller wars that went on. I mean, there was the issue of the the Tamils and the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka. And the question is, how did these eventually come to some sort of accommodation? And the dynamic is fairly well, the exhaustion happens, the trauma is going to be there. There's either an enforced political solution from third parties like the UN or somebody like this, or somehow they find their way and do it themselves. I mean, there's no one solution to this. It's going to depend on the character of the Houthis and the Yemenis as to how they want to move forward. And Qais is absolutely right. The ethic of care has to be predominant here, and they have to share power, and they have to care for each other. And that's the relational component. If you want to solve the problems in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, or whatever, and if there's this, whatever political solution you put in Iraq doesn't work because you can't get the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds to like each other or work with each other, you've neglected the relational component here. And that takes a long, long time. And certainly a lot of skill.
Yeah, Metta, can I just interject about this business of coming different groups of people, how they solve their problems? One is that in Cyprus, there has been peace since the Turks and the Greeks decided to have their two separate republics. There's been certainly no violence, no war. Maybe it's not the ideal situation, but at least they're happy. That also applies to a large extent to the Bosnia.
I'm sorry, you mentioned Greece. Is that what you're saying? Greece?
No, Cyprus.
What?
Cyprus.
We're talking back to Cyprus. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And so you're satisfied. At least they're not fighting, and that's
exactly.
Well, there's two kinds of peace. There's two kinds of peace you're talking about. There's negative peace, which is stop the violence, and there's positive peace, which has to do with the well-being and the harmony and the relational aspect being restored. Negative peace is what we normally focus on because it's relatively the easiest thing to do. But to rebuild the communities and the well-being and the wellness and the reconciliation and trauma, the positive peace part is just a little more difficult. But we simply have to be aware that this is a road we go down and go down it. Don't refuse not to go down it.
Mm-hmm. Qais, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
But the second half of my solution was going to mention again how successful Northern Ireland has been. There was a lot of interfactional and interreligious killing. And yet Northern Ireland, after a while and after they've lost so many people, decided that they would still work together and form Northern Ireland. And we have not seen any violence for a long time. On the other hand, you have countries like Czechoslovakia. They came together and did not work. And then Slovakia and the Czech Republic decided amicably and very peacefully to go their own way. Why can we not do that?
Good question.
Don't get me started on Czechoslovakia. That was something I got interested in some years ago, but it's a unique case almost because very few cases occur in which you have a separation of that kind, countries splitting in two, and do it in a friendly way, as did happen with the Czechs and the Slovaks. But at any rate, that's neither here nor there. Question is where to go from here. How can we as Canadians be effective in promoting exactly what I think all three of us have agreed we should be doing, that is pressing at least our own government, and let's hope that we could press other governments as well to put a stop to the fighting, turn off the tap with the logistics supplies and so on, and get food into these people and so on, and then begin the work of trying to create reconciliation and the creation of new democratic institutions. How can we contribute to that? I'd like some good advice. Am I supposed to phone my prime minister in the morning, or what am I supposed to do?
Well, to me, there's another Nobel Peace Prize like Axworthy or Mines Treaties or whatever. If you can do that codification, of peace operations as a precursor to military intervention. Too much. The big solution in the world, the global community, to conflict or to differences that we have is violence. And that has to change from a worldview. We need a different future there. Because of the way nuclear weapons are proliferating, we don't have all that much time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Qais, if I assume you are actually in touch with other Arabs. I know you have a weekly show where you interview people in Canada who are doing things worthwhile, who are of Arab background. So that must mean that you have a very large network of Arab Canadian friends. What are you and those people doing to try to promote or press the government to make some changes? Our government, Canadian government.
Yes. I have started the show several months ago called Arab Canadians Making a Difference, interviewing people who have done something spectacular or something useful for Canadian society at large, not only the Arab community. And it's going very well, and we have hits of 4,000 and so on to these shows. So I'm happy about that. I think that I'm dreaming in Technicolor now, but wouldn't it be wonderful? Let's just imagine that our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau takes it upon himself to solve the Yemeni crisis by saying, look, whispering in the ear of the people that kind of matter, such as President Trump and people of that caliber, say, look, can you just allow me to try to solve this problem? We are a nation that's highly respected in the world, Canada. We know we've done this before. We've intervened, and we have, people of international repute who have been peacemakers in the world. We will try to bring the warring factions in Yemen together. We want you to kind of restrain MBS and your side of the conflict, and get someone to also talk to the Houthis and the Iranian side. But coming from someone of the caliber of the Prime Minister of Canada or something like that, what harm would come from that?
No.
And wouldn't it be wonderful?
Why doesn't he see it himself as an opportunity?
Yes, for a prize, for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes.
Yeah, yes, you're absolutely right, Qais. He has advocated a return to peace and stabilization operations as a platform of the Liberal Party. We simply have to ask, what does this mean? And here's an opportunity to actually do something. Otherwise, it's just words.
Yes, and nobody would dare say to him, look, you keep out of this, I'm sure they'll try. I know some people will try, but he'll just go on. Make it your mission, Justin, please.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, let's say, Qais, is it a possibility that you could put this show up on your own, part of your own sequence? Because if we could reach this 4,000 or 5,000 friends of yours who are all Arab Canadians, and ask all of them to unite on this particular project of trying to get Justin Trudeau to become a big peace man, wouldn't that be a great project?
Okay. Yes, we should. Yes, let's talk about how we can do this technically. Yes, surely.
Yeah, well,
I'll be delighted to do that. Yes,
that's terrific. Well, this will become a video, and it will be available for anybody who wants to go to the website called tosavetheworld.ca. That's where the thing will wind up. It'll also be YouTube. It'll also be on Peace Magazine's webpage, and it will be, as it is right now, on Peace Magazine's Facebook page. So there are a number of sites where people can see this video, and it will be available indefinitely. And we're going to also make it into a podcast. So pretty soon, we have about 35 or 40 these previous shows that I've made, and they're all going to be made into podcasts so that people can listen to them while they're driving their car or going jogging or cooking their breakfast, and not have to sit in front of their TV or their computer screen in order to watch the videos, but they can do that too if they wish. Anyway, this is just to give people an idea about the fact that this series of talks is sponsored by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World, which is an effort of ours to try to address 6 global problems that are stupendously important. So next week, we'll be back with another show dealing with one of the threats that humankind faces now. And I'm really grateful to both of you for your thoughts and your participation and for the work that you are already going on doing in trying to bring peace to the world. Thank you both, and I hope to see you soon. All right.
Thank you very much, and thank you for doing this, Metta. Of course, Paul and I see each other all the time.
Well, it's good to meet you. I'm so happy. Okay. Good night.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.